quick housekeeping rules and the usual notes on how to use the interpretation, and then we can, move forward. So as you know, the webinar has simultaneous interpretation. So first, we would like to request, if possible, though not mandatory, that you write your full names and your affiliation in as part of like a virtual list of participants. Just what name and the organization you represent. And as you know, there is simultaneous interpretation. So si quieren escuchar el webinar en español, pueden utilizar la interpretación en español. El botón está abajo a la derecha. Vous pouvez aussi le faire en français. L'interprétation est disponible en bas à droite. Donc, vous pouvez cliquer là et vous pouvez écouter le webinaire en français et aussi parler en français si vous le voulez. So, once everyone is in their respective languages, then please try if you are speaking, to speak very slowly so that our interpreters can follow and translate what you're saying. And basically speak loud and clear, one person at a time, and say your name when you participate. If you're participating, verbally and not just sending your questions via the chat, that would also be very helpful. And with that, I think we can move forward. I mean, many of you have already participated in our previous webinar, so you probably know how this works. But if you have any issues or questions, please let us know in the chat and we'll try to help you find a way to the interpretation. And yeah, then I'll leave the floor to Claire.
Thank you, Bertha. So as mentioned, this is to formally welcome everyone to the GCF Watch International Webinar Series. And as Bertha mentioned, this is the third session, and we will be talking about the GCF engagement of civil society from different regions and countries. So as mentioned, this is a series of the 3 webinars. We have 3. We have the previous 2 that happened last June 10 and July 8. And if you have attended those, good for you. You are now in the 3rd session. You're near graduation with our webinar series. At this session, we will, sorry, where is it? Okay. At this session, we'll have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 veteran civil society representatives who have been engaging with the GCF for quite some time now. They will share with us their experiences, the challenges that they have encountered, as well as the practices and activities that they have done at their respective regions and countries with regards to GCF work. So just to add also with the housekeeping rules that Bertha mentioned, should you have questions while our speakers are presenting, please do so. Please type them using the Q&A button or in the chat, and then wait for us. Florencia and Bertha and myself will be looking at the chat from time to time and looking at the question and answer button from time to time to see if there are questions, and perhaps at some point during the presentation we can call on you and acknowledge that your question, or request you to verbalize your question for our speakers. Once recognized, please say your name. Please start by saying your name, your organization, and the language that you want to deliver your intervention or your question with. If you're not speaking, we request everyone also to please mute their mic. And yeah, if there are no more questions, I hope that all of those are clear. If there are no more questions, I will now call on our first speaker, which is Bertha Argueta from Germanwatch, to speak about the participation of civil society in various GCF processes at the national level. And in our experience in Asia, we have been reiterating this with our civil society group members that a big chunk of work that civil society should do should be done at the national level, and that is with engagement with the national designated authorities, or NDAs, and focal points. So without further ado, I will now call on Bertha to speak about this and expound on the CSO participation with the NDAs. Bertha?
Thank you. I'll stop sharing this and start sharing my presentation in a second. I hope you can all see it now.
Yep, we can see it.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Claire. And obviously the idea is just to introduce more of the theoretical aspects of this so that our colleagues on the ground in Latin America, Africa, and Asia can actually give us more of like the real everyday engagement. So I wanted to start by introducing the notion of why it's so important for civil society to participate in the processes of the Green Climate Fund. As you know, the Green Climate Fund itself was constituted with the idea of the importance of stakeholder input and participation. The government instrument of the fund actually requests the GCF board to develop mechanisms to promote the input and participation of stakeholders, and these also include civil society organizations, vulnerable groups, women and indigenous peoples, as well as the private sector, in the whole process of designing, developing and implementing the strategies and activities to be financed by the fund. So this is like, in theory, at least at the heart of how the GCF was conceived. And CSOs, we believe, can especially play a very important role, or many important roles, in the GCF processes that can help to hold the GCF institutions accountable to their goals and policies, meaning, you know, like for them to really live up to what is written in the government instrument and all the other policies that they've developed, but also to push for vulnerable communities to be included in the national and international processes of the Green Climate Fund so that their voices can be heard, and their experiences can be built upon for better interventions, better projects, better programs by the GCF. And finally, we think, you know, the CSOs have a very important role to play in supporting the development of funding proposals that are actually adjusted to the realities of the local context. So this is just like a very general notion of why we think civil society has such an important role to play in all the processes of the Green Climate Fund.
Bertha, could you share your whole screen so we can better see your slides? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure exactly what it is that I'm sharing. Let me try again. Is this better?
Yes, that's much
okay.
better.
So what I was sharing is the slideshow and not the actual slides. I'm sorry about that. And
that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Great. So just to have a few, you know, notions of what the different paths to engaging with the GCF are from civil society perspectives. Obviously, one of the important issues is, or like ways in which CSOs can participate is by building other CSOs capacities, but also of capacities of local organizations and national institutions. And when we talk about capacities, you know, just sharing information and generally just sharing knowledge, because we think all CSOs and local communities have knowledge that they can share and build on, you know, the different aspects and experiences they have. So, you know, just this sharing of information is important. We can also facilitate dialogues around the GCF finance activities and claim roles as key stakeholder in national activities. And since we're going to be focusing on the national level today, mostly, I think this is a very important aspect. CSOs can also conduct advocacy and constructively provide technical input on the development of GCF policies and frameworks, as well as critically monitor and assess projects and programs on the ground. I mean, throughout the whole cycle, really, from the design to the implementation and the monitoring and evaluations parts, to really track progress and especially to keep an eye on the potential impacts of these activities, both positive, but also especially when there are potential negative impacts of GCF activities. And finally, there's also the possibility for civil society organizations to be part of the implementing structures of the GCF, whether by being accredited, which is quite hard, but it's possible, or by just being executing entities of GCS project on the ground. So why are national designated authorities and focal points so important for the CSO engagement, which is kind of the point of the presentation? Well, as you know, the GCF structure or the way the GCF works has an international level and a national level. At the international level, obviously, the GCF answers to the Conference of the Parties. There's a board where all the core decision, which is the body that makes all the core decisions relating to policies, to accreditation, and to projects. And there's the Secretariat, which is responsible for the management. I mean, obviously the structure is a bit more complex than that, but we're not really looking at the international structure today. But at the national level, the GCF engages with countries mainly through nationally designated authorities or national focal points. And these are like the key contact institutions within a country that set the political framework of work with the GCF at the country level. So in that sense, the national designated authority really serves as the liaison between the developing country governments and other institutions and stakeholders and the GCF. Usually these are, well, they are all government institutions, whether it's a department or a unit within a ministry, very often either the finance ministry or the environment ministry. And sometimes we don't have NDAs, but we have focal points, which is usually just a person within a government institution that's responsible for matters related to the GCF. And these people technically need to have a lot of expertise and knowledge about or capacities to conduct certain processes. And in here you can see, for example, that they have to have the ability to contribute to national plans and strategies. They have to have expertise, ideally in climate change mitigation and adaptation, knowledge of climate change policies, contacts, acknowledging relevant institutions and other stakeholders. And this is very important. They have to have the capacity to coordinate and hold multi-stakeholder consultations so that the processes at the national level can be participatory. They also have to have the ability to conduct M&E and other knowledge related to climate finance in general. So what are the roles of these NDAs more closely? Well, there's quite a few. Obviously, they have the roles of giving no objection letters for projects and programs, meaning that when an accredited entity wants to present a project, they have to go through the NDA to approve that this project is acceptable for the country. They also nominate direct access entities, but more importantly for what we're going to be looking at today, they also have the role of convening national stakeholders. So these NDAs and focal points should, in theory, hold national consultations with all relevant stakeholders, including other government ministries, of course, and other government organizations that are relevant, as well as local governments, but also they should convene CSOs, local communities, the private sector, and many other stakeholders, depending obviously on the process that are relevant. And while technically they're not mandatory, the GCF does encourage NDAs and focal points to convene these consultations as an essential part of identifying national priorities in a broad sense. So not just like government priorities, ideally, but also the priorities of the communities involved and other vulnerable groups. So some notions of what an ideal stakeholder consultation. Sorry?
Oh, excuse me.
And that's okay. Some criteria for how these national stakeholder consultations would ideally take place. You know, they should be set up as a continuous process that allows for like the follow-up of agreements, updates, regular assessments of progress, and course correction. So ideally not a one-off thing just to more or less rubber stamp whatever the NDA wants to do, but really like something that is continuous and that allows for the follow-up of everything that's been going on before. They should also be inclusive and engage all relevant actors. The GCF explicitly mentions that vulnerable groups, women and indigenous people should be included in the stakeholder consultations. They can also be integrated in already existing mechanisms of coordination of multi-stakeholder engagement if they already happen, related to other national consultation processes. It could be planning processes like NDC processes, whatever else already exists. And it's also important to have them for the environmental, as part of the environmental and social policy of the GCF, which does obviously require consultation with stakeholders to make sure that the environmental and social impacts of whatever activities will be conducted in the country with GCF funding actually are taken into consideration in here. So that also requires. So some ideas, and this is just, you know, as I said, like very theoretical, and the better part, the actual experience is coming after this. For CSOs engagement at the national level with NDAs, well, important to know who the NDA is and to establish a good and regular contact with the national designated authorities and focal points. Really engage into dialogue with them to request spaces for civil society at the national level, whether in existing stakeholder processes of whenever a project, a program, a readiness project is being planned and implemented. No, that's important to like. Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. That's important to like really engage in these processes. To lobby also for specific seats for civil society within national mechanisms or structures that handle GCF matters, whether this is like a steering committee of a program or a project, or a task force or a panel, or anything that is, you know, convening stakeholders to really handle GCF matters, and in general, you know, climate change related matters. To make proposals as well to NDAs and focal points on potential candidates for accreditation, as well as to make proposals for potential projects, concept notes, etc. And ideally also to participate actively in the monitoring of national implementation of GCF policies and programs, and to really feed that back into the CSO community at the international level. You know, these experiences on the ground at the national level are really, really relevant to build the international CSO community's knowledge of how of what the GCF policies and programs actually look once they're implemented on the ground and not just like in theory, basically. So who are the NDAs? You can find who your NDA is at the GCF website, as you can see. And, you know, there's a directory by country where you can find all the information of, you know, contact info and who the person is, the point is, and where to find them, so that you can, you know, start a conversation with your national designated authorities. And with that, I think I'll stop here and just get back to Claire for the next steps in the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertha. So again, for our participants, if you have questions, we'll have that. I will have that part towards the end. But if you have questions, you can also type them on chat or in the Q&A button. Thank you, Bertha, for reminding us and making it clear that stakeholder participation is actually part of the mandate of the GCF, and for highlighting the value of CSO inputs and participation to shape the policies and program of the GCF. I also like that Bertha has emphasized that engaging with the NDA is also key in our engagement with the GCF, because the NDA serves as the gatekeeper between the country and the GCF. Whatever it is that will be forwarded to the GCF goes through the NDA, and whatever the GCF, any projects or programs that the GCF will implement in our countries goes through the NDA. So it's a strategic, the NDA has this important role, and it is strategic for CSOs to really engage and run after our NDAs and ensure that we have meaningful participation with them. So thank you for that, Bertha. And we will now proceed to our next speaker to share what are the experiences of civil society groups, engagement with the NDAs or with the GCF at the international level from Africa. So without further ado, I will call on Collins Otieno from PACJA to share the experiences of civil society groups in Africa. Please go ahead, Collins.
Thanks, Claire. And thank you for pronouncing my last name the right way. Not so many people get it. Thank you so much. I don't know if Bertha, you will help us put the presentation up.
Yes, sorry, give me a second. I'm trying to.
Thank you. Sorry. Probably just to mention, I would pick for the presentation from the 5th slide. Having listened to Bertha setting the background of the whole webinar, I think it's important that I start from the 5th slide, because I know that I have 10 minutes to make the whole of the presentation, and the first one was basically to just lay a background on what really the project is about and everything. So probably the best thing to do is to start from the 5th and probably mention that while of course Bertha has really presented on the GCF and the fact that it's also the portfolio is increasing. We've seen various reports, including the shadow report by Oxfam, of course, the climate finance African outlook by the Africa Development Bank, still stating that while the portfolio of the GCF is increasing, we still have less than 3% of climate finance flows in Africa today. Yet Africa is the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So you can have a look at the fact that Africa is the most vulnerable. Yet, of course, we can also bring in the issue of the Asian continent. And have a look at the finance flows that are going to this particular 2 continents. And you can also still back that up by the fact that Africa's economies are still emerging. And while adaptation still remains the main focus of this continent, the prioritization on mitigation is something that is worrying. And just to build a case on why really the involvement of civil society organizations in this, especially from the African continent, is quite important to us. Bertha, if you could help us push to the next slide. Yeah. Still to just build that case, you kind of look at the resources versus the challenges that probably the African continent is facing today. And you can have a look at the promise of GCF, or the developed states or parties, to the $100 billion US pledge, which hasn't been met. And the question is, shall we arrive here at the end of the day? Do we need more civil society organizations pushing for the realization of the commitment to the contribution to the GCF? Accessibility of GCF remains something that is still in limbo. So is it possible for a united civil society organizations to be able to help in engaging the GCF board to ensure that accessibility is something that we can easily maneuver? And we have sections of the Paris Agreement to facilitating climate finance access, which are undone up to date, especially issues regarding the Paris rulebook, which are really delaying the process. How can the civil society organizations probably have sort of a hand in delivering such particular issues of concern to, of course, access to the GCF? in broader spectra. Bertha, if you could push again to the next slide. So we still have a special requirements to accessing the global climate funds, including the GCF, including the policies, regulations, and strategies, which of course one cannot be able to access this particular sources of finances, of course, climate finances without. So looking at probably the African continent, which probably most of the policies are really not aligned, most of the regulations are not aligned to be able to access the GCF. I think this works to the disadvantage of course, developing countries, and of course, the bit of the picture on the left, quite on the right, probably on your left, kind of gives a clear indication of the access to climate finance, including the GCF, amongst, of course, those perceived developed countries and the developing countries. So you tend to have this particular bottlenecks limiting the African continent, especially the countries of Africa, which of course we know that about 34 countries of Africa are still kind of listed among the least developed countries. So these are kind of limiting the ability to access this particular finances, including the GCF. We have the difficulty in accessing requisite data and information. You know, you cannot access GCF without the requisite information and requisite data that is needed, of course, to build a case on of course, access to the same. So these are just some of the issues that we can bring out as of course, engaging with the GCF and trying to also give the perspective of the civil society organizations in Africa. Of course, upfront costs of scale and infrastructure development, of strengthening of the institution. Again, GCF and as well as adaptation fund. And of course, we want to dwell on GCF quite a bit. This is quite another challenge. Of course, non-institutional setups is quite another challenge. You find that countries probably like Liberia, who are really suffering from issues regarding the institutional setups, because it's one of the countries that mostly quite of course in the least developed countries, and trying to access this with the lack of institutions or the setup of institutions kind of limits its ability to be able to access, of course, finances such as the GCF. So these are some of the things really why we are in this as the African civil society organizations, to be able to propagate or spearhead the access to a GCF from the African continent. But if you could help, probably push it the next slide. So the opportunities that, of course, we have looked at and seen within this particular space on how we can be able to, or rather how we have been engaging with GCF, of course, is purely on an access, or rather enhancing access through, of course, the technical resources. And this is from the private sector side, just trying to engage the private sector so that we can have that capacity transfer, because of course the private sector has the wherewithal to, of course, obtain the data and obtain the requisite skills and everything to be able to put joint proposals together. We have seen this work, of course, in the case of Kenya, and while I will be sharing some of the things that we have been able to do with, of course, our NDA, you will be able to see some of course, like the Towards Ending Drought and Climate Emergencies project, which was awarded by GCF, which is partly in Isiolo, is something that the private sector really came out to be able to assist in the technical aspects of this particular project. We have, of course, raising awareness with the intention to capacity build the public, of course, from the private sector perspective. And then, of course, we have the strengthening of governance system and reforming of regulatory frameworks, and of course, lobbying and advocacy. So this is from the private sector, and you can see that the same being repeated from, of course, the public sector. If you can move to the next slide, you can see just the same particular opportunities to shift the scenario, of course, from the African civil society perspective, coming to be. Bertha, if you can just move in to the next two slides so that I can explain how we have been able to do this through a small sort of theory of change. Yeah. So basically, the whole of these opportunities are put into this particular theory of change, and we work under the three principles of creating evidence, institutional capacity development, and of course having the strategic policy advocacy groups. And of course, many people probably in the group know who PACJA is, and PACJA is basically an alliance of civil society organizations, and that's why we are seeing, you see our particular third sphere of how we do this involving strategic policy advocacy groups. But of course, these policy advocacy groups are driven by evidence on the access of GCF. And of course, we equally build their capacity to be able to engage in the GCF processes. Sorry. So basically what we do is we strengthen their capacity such that their capacity are increased. Okay. Someone is asking if you could put the presentation on presentation mode. So yeah, we kind of build the institutional capacity in a way that they're able to engage directly with the GCF board, and thanks to Bertha and of course the team at the GCF Watch, we have constantly kind of engaged, of course, through the countries that we work to be able to support their engagement with the GCF board. We equally package the evidence, and this evidence is co-created with the NDAs in such a way that there is very limited, if any, discrepancy on evidence that is generated, of course, by the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance through its member CSOs to be able to engage appropriately with, of course, the GCF. The other part of it is, of course, the advocacy plans. We kind of help the member organizations to be able to develop advocacy plans in a way that it reflects the spirit of the African civil society in engagement with, of course, the GCF. And what we equally insist on is involvement of the women, which of course we have just 2 weeks ago, we had a webinar, which was basically in looking at the West African region, being spearheaded by our country national platform in Nigeria, which is called CSDevNet, Civil Society Development Network in Nigeria, just looking at how women could easily participate in the GCF kind of GCF Watch, and of course engage with the board, GCF board, in a way that they could rather give their opinion and of course their demands or their wishes within the same, and that in itself really has helped in a way that so that in itself has kind of boosted, or rather the involvement of women in that particular aspect. So we kind of concentrate on women on a big kind of tune. We equally have increasing the influence of civil society organization on climate finance, and this will involve equally budget tracking and kind of those particular issues. So this influence kind of take us to increasing the political goodwill. And in the political goodwill, we are kind of just looking at issues revolving the NDAs. And of course, Bertha, I cannot explain further than Bertha had explained on how we can be able to, how NDAs are crucial in the engagement, of course, within the country levels as far as GCF is concerned. So we are looking at improving the political goodwill, but in the perspective of the NDAs, to be able to help in improving the administration of climate finance and of course climate change response strategies, including adaptation and mitigation, with our main outcome, or rather the desired outcome, being climate resilient community societies and economies in the African continent. So I think with that, I could ask Bertha probably just to help share the, kindly Bertha, if you could just help share the PowerPoint, or rather the Excel that I shared with you, so that in the next few minutes that I have, I can be able to show some of the projects that we've been able to do with the NDA in Kenya. Basically, on climate finance tracking, and I will purely target Isiolo because the climate finance tracking in Isiolo was basically on based on the GCF, or rather the award by GCF, which was awarding a project called, of course, we have given it an acronym called TWENDE, which is towards ending drought and other climate-induced challenges within the broader space of the northern Kenya, which is more of a pastoral pastoral area within the country. So basically, what we did first with the NDA was we tried first to do what we, of course, everyone else calls budget coding or budget lines coding, so that we knew where really which particular finances were coming from, and from that, then we could trickle down to the departmental level to be able to pinpoint, and this is basically on resilience. We were really focusing on resilience, on how probably we could look at some of the monies that, or resources that were coming from, of course, wherever they were coming from, but we were keen on the GCF money so that we could probably look at how much was coming into the country as regards GCF, and this was purely based on the award by GCF on towards ending drought and other climate-induced challenges in the northern part of Kenya. And if you could probably have a look, we have been able to profile in a way from 2015 to 2019 based on, of course, the trends of climate emergencies, and just try to look at within these counties. Counties are kind of the local level governments, and of course, just looking at how the counties appropriate these resources in a way that either reflect investment in resilience or reduced investment in resilience. And what we could see, of course, is there are certain counties that were really kind of adjusting in terms of investment in resilience. Of course, the northern part because of course, the GCF award, but we could also see that there still needs to be that experience whereby the civil society organization could push further, especially in limiting certain challenges that were being experienced within this particular field. And this is a live document that is still being worked on. It's sort of a tracking tool where you could easily use this anywhere within any place just to track some of the investments, of course, the GCF investments within the country based on specifics that you would want to track. So this is purely, if you look at this particular data, of course, it has several others that were resulting into this dashboard. So if you look at specifics of the data, you'll realize that there are specific counties, especially up north in Kenya, and because of GCF and because of the advocacy, because of the combined effort of the civil society organizations, you could see that there is some bit of increased investment in resilience initiatives in the country. And if you could just look back at the presentation I've made on how we desire to achieve climate resilient economies and societies in the African continent, then this shows the aspirations that we kind of have, that by the end of the day, yes, we can finish in less than a minute. So if this particular one could be able to guide the aspiration that we have, that by the end of the day, we have a resilient people, societies, and economies in the African continent, then the GCF has kind of a place to be able to see this through. Of course, there are several challenges that we have been able to see, misappropriation being one of them. Of course, we have seen quite a bit of through this particular dashboard, which of course Bertha is free to share with every other person, which has which kind of this has like all the challenges, of course, summarized in one of the pages of this particular Excel that you could be able to see, and a certain kind of metrics in terms of collection of data. We realize that one of the thing is that most people really don't like sharing data, especially the institutions. When there is misappropriation, they kind of shy away from sharing the data. And of course, it depends on the NDA, on where really you will get the data and where you will not get the data. Otherwise, allow me to stop there and I will be able to take in any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. So, because we have a number of speakers for this session, I will request everyone to park your questions for a while, or if you cannot park it, just type it on the chat or in the Q&A section. And then we'll have a section towards the end of the session to answer all your questions. So we have noted there are 2 questions already addressed to Collins. Collins, if you can also answer, you can also type your answer in the Q&A box if you wish to answer that the question addressed to you now. So there's a question about the African indigenous peoples in the GCF. So maybe you can answer that on the side. And there are a few questions more raised in the chat, and we will take note of that, and we'll invite all our speakers to answer them towards the end of the session. So again, thank you, Collins, for sharing the experience in the African region. He has shared that it's important for the CSOs to build their capacity first about the Green Climate Fund, and then proceed with the strategic planning of advocacies in their respective countries. So that's, thank you, Collins, for that. And then now we can move on to the Asia region. So we have 2 speakers for Asia. Wait, where is it? There. So we have, first I will call on Tunga Rai from Nepal Federation of Indigenous Nationalities, to be followed by Titi Soentoro from Aksi for Gender, Social, and Ecological Justice. Both of them are very much engaged and quite old with GCF work already, and I'm sure they will be sharing a lot of their experiences at their respective countries when it comes to GCF work. So without further ado, please go ahead, Tunga, and be immediately followed by Titi. Thank you, Tunga. Thank you, and go ahead, Tunga.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Tunga Rai. I work with Nepal Federation of Indigenous Nationalities, and I have been following the Green Climate Fund for a couple of years now. So I'm going to share my experience from Nepal in relation to engagement with the Green Climate Fund. So first of all, let me share with you why it is important to engage on GCF activities at global, regional, and national level. It's simply because we live in distinct realities and distinct contexts, and also every country and communities have distinct need for climate action, which sometimes are not realized at the GCF level and sometimes at the national designated authority level. So this is the reason why we CSOs and indigenous peoples are engaging with the GCF activities at different levels. So this is one of the picture, our family picture of a civil society organization, including indigenous peoples engagement at the GCF board meeting. And this kind of meetings and our engagement at the GCF level has been very helpful for us to engage at country level. I will tell you how and why in the next slide. But before that, let me also share you that from Nepal, there are 5 proposed proposals being developed in the pipelines, and 2 of them have already been approved by the GCF. And that means also there is a quite some projects coming up from Nepal to the GCF, and that has also a lot of opportunities and also challenges posed to civil society organizations and indigenous peoples and other marginalized groups in the country. And in terms of direct access entity, 5 entities have applied. Yes, 5 entities have applied to the GCF, and then 2 of them have already been accredited, one in 2019 and one in 2020. So this has set the context how we have been engaged in the GCF activities in Nepal. And on the other hand, also, as you might have already know that the GCF has also some readiness support for the developing countries. With that readiness support, countries can have can work on their readiness activities. Under that, Nepal also has established some readiness mechanism under which we have also been demanding civil society space to be able to participate in readiness activities. So our strategy to engage with NDAs, to engage with accredited entities is really engage, educate, and empower. That also means that engage and then awareness raising and advocacy for our issues. So what we have been doing around that strategy is, first, we try to engage with our national designated authority. As Claire already mentioned, that NDAs are the gatekeeper and the main gateway to interface between countries and the GCF. At the same time, accredited entities are equally important because they are the ones who approach GCF to get their proposals approved and implement GCF project activity. So our strategy is to engage with NDA and also engage with accredited entities. And on the other hand, we also strategize ourselves to mobilize our networks, raise their awareness, and disseminate information. How we do that is we review the project documents, policy papers, and provide input to NDAs, accredited entities, and sometimes to the GCF. We also do some translation of key policies into national languages. We do some other publications, make video documentaries for awareness raising, and also we have been doing briefing papers, developing position papers in consultation with our networks and member organization. And then we also organize dialogue workshops and interaction events. So for that, what has been the strength for civil society organization and indigenous peoples is really the environmental and social policies of the Green Climate Fund, as Bertha already mentioned. And the GCF indigenous peoples policy has been one of a very strong strength for us to be able to engage in our activities. So on the other hand, also, as we all know that the GCF is established and mandated by the UNFCCC decisions. So Paris Agreement is one of the key agreement, one of the milestone under the UNFCCC. So if you see the specific articles and section of the Paris Agreement, that has also a lot of basis for civil society and indigenous peoples to advocate our issues. For example, the preamble section of Paris Agreement has a reference on human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples. Likewise, the Article 7 on adaptation, particularly on paragraph 5, has a reference on the knowledge of indigenous peoples. And also you can find non-carbon benefit section under Article 5, which is mitigation. Likewise, you can also find the non-economic loss and damage under the article on loss and damage. So there are a couple of other articles and provisions on the Paris Agreement, which is also the basis for GCF to comply their activities and also the NDAs to comply their activities. So based on those foundations, we have been having two approaches. One is a direct approach of advocacy, that is to ask NDAs and accredited entities to comply with Paris Agreement and also other UNFCCC decisions and GCF policies. If that does not really helps, and also there are some other indirect approach, we can advocate our engagement, that is to comply with national and international human rights instruments, which is the obligation of the countries. For example, Nepal has voted for UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It has ratified ILO Convention number 169 and other human rights treaties. So to advocate those international human rights treaties and conventions is also the indirect way to say why the NDAs and accredited entities should comply with those GCF policies and decisions. So let me also share what is in the GCF policy and what is our key position with NDAs and accredited entities. You already know that the GCF Indigenous Peoples Policy has a reference on human rights principles, human rights approach, and also it ensures the rights of Indigenous peoples over their lands, territories, and resources. It also has a reference on the application of free, prior, and informed consent. And also it says that if the GCF-funded projects are implemented in Indigenous peoples' territory, it should also include Indigenous peoples' plans in the proposal. Likewise, it also talks about cultural heritage, voluntary isolation, self-governance of Indigenous peoples, traditional knowledge and livelihood systems, and capacity building, etc. So those issues are really explicitly mentioned in the GCF Indigenous Peoples Policy, which has helped us to be able to advocate and persuade NDAs and accredited entities in our national level engagement. So this is another one example why we need to advocate those issues is simply because if you look at the picture, then one Indigenous woman is weaving a traditional costume, having fiber from the wild nettle. You can see in the picture at the top right-hand top of the picture, and then that links with the identity and the knowledge system and the whole livelihood system of Indigenous people. So this is the reason, and this is the way we try to educate people and also the NDAs and accredited entities. Now, coming to the end of my presentation, we have also certain challenges despite all of those strengths and opportunities we have in place. The challenge is that we have really limited awareness about those policies that exist in the GCF, in the UNFCCC, and also the state obligations. So the awareness is limited also within the NDA, within accredited entities sometimes, and also within civil society at large. And we have also the lack of meaningful participation and informed consultation in many instances. We find documents refers that they have conducted consultation, but the question is, was the consultation really based on informed decisions and informed consultation? But we often find that the consultations are just the superficial, just having people in the meeting, but they don't really have in-depth knowledge what was the agenda and what is the conclusion and so on. Likewise, we have also the lack of accountability from government side and also sometimes from accredited entities, because we have experienced that accredited entities make commitments during GCF meetings by saying that they will comply with all the policies and they will consult with indigenous peoples and civil societies, women, youth, and others while they implement their projects. But once their proposal is approved, then there is a lack of accountability towards their commitments and policy compliances. And also we see the lack of transparency in terms of how the projects are implemented, how the policy have been formulated and applied. So those are the challenges we experienced so far in Nepal. There are a lot of things to share, but given the time constraint, I just would like to share you that the struggle continues. We are not there yet. So if you have any additions and queries, we can discuss later. I stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tunga. So thank you for sharing that the strategy of civil society in Nepal is really the engagement, not only with the NDA, but also with the accredited entities that are implementing the projects in Nepal. Thank you for that, and also for sharing that there are still challenges and more work has to be done at the national level. I will now call on Titi Soentoro from Indonesia, who is also going to share with us the experiences of the civil society groups in Indonesia in engaging with the NDA, also with their with the national strategies that they do in order for the civil society to have meaningful participation in various GCF processes. Titi, please go ahead.
Thank you, Claire. Good evening. Greetings from Indonesia. And I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation and opportunities to share some experience from Indonesia in the GCF advocacy. And thank you, Bertha, who will assist me in sharing my presentations. Next, please. So at first, I would like to give you an overview of our advocacy. It's also the phases of the progress of the Indonesian NDA. So up to 2015, the work related to the GCF in Indonesia was under the Indonesian National Council for Climate Change, which is under the Indonesian Presidential Office. And the work on the GCF particularly, the council led the coordinations with the Ministry of National Development Planning, Ministry for Environment, and the Ministry of Finance. And in 2015, the council was abolished due to the restructuring ministries under the Indonesian new presidents. So then we have like 2 years, it's like a disappearing informations about the GCF stuff in Indonesia, because this process, it took like 2 years for the government to restructure. And finally, in 2017, we got the informations that the Indonesian NDA office was set up, and it is under the Ministry of Finance, precisely the fiscal agency of the ministry. You will see this development then. The GCF, the issue under GCF is considered as investment, as finance. If before there is a part of chunk from the ministries of environment or national planning as there, but not right now is solely under the Ministry of Finance. In this stage of the development of the Indonesian NDA, we also develop ourselves towards the advocacy. So until 2015, we start to know the GCF, we start to approach the council, but during the restructuring period, we lost contact because we didn't know whom to be contacted, because we don't know where the agency will be right at that time. So, but we continue to do outreach on GCF to the Indonesian CSO, to the local grant makers and local groups. So once we know that the Indonesian NDA is under the Ministry of Finance, we email, but nobody answer. One opportunity was the Asia Regional Dialogue in Da Nang. So I was also representing the GCF CSO observers, and then I got the opportunity to directly introduce myself to the staff of the NDA office, and then our relationship in not working together, but engagement start from there. So in this time, we are now in the stage of capacity building and engagement with the NDA. Next slide, please. So at first we contributed for our publications on the Green Climate Fund's CSO guide for engagement and local access with a specific context, and it is in Bahasa Indonesia as well in English. And then we introduced to the Indonesian CSO based in Jakarta through a book launch event, because it is more fun to introduce something which is heavy through an event like book launch and music and so on. The next. And then we did several workshops for people living in Eastern Indonesia and people living in Western Indonesia, because Indonesia is so bright. We have 3 time zones, and from one end to the other end, we need, like, if we fly, we need 10 hours. So it means it is important to go there, so introduce to local governments, to the CSO, and also local grant makers, because there's a lot of local grant makers also actively work with the local communities. Next, please. Next, Bertha. Yeah, and also after a lot of works related before, please go back to the previous one. Back to the previous one, Bertha. Yeah, this one. So after the outreach, which is introducing the general stuff on the GCF, next please. We also did a workshop or capacity building more targeted related to the projects. For example, we have 3 webinar series related to GCF funded projects in Indonesia, introducing it to the CSO. And the other webinar is about deep dive into the REDD GCF projects in Indonesia, which was just approved at that time. And also we discussed in a webinar about opportunities and challenges for GCF advocacy in Indonesia. So this is more specific into the projects already approved, and totally around 120 participants attended the 3 webinars. Next, please. Next. Beside the CSO capacity buildings and outreach, we also start to build up recommendations on the CSO or stakeholders engagement in Indonesia. For that purpose, we did interviews and also focus group discussions with some people who have the experience, and also practitioners that have experience in the engagement in the public decision makings. For example, the Human Rights Commission, the Peatland Restoration Agency, and then the Forestry Council, and so on. So why we invite them to contribute or to hear their experience, to tap their experience, is because we want to introduce the CSO engagement by saying this is based on Indonesian own experience. It's not imposed from whatever outside, because they will ask, so why we need CSO engagement? We don't know about that, but we say, see, Indonesia also have the experience with the engagement of stakeholders in the public decision making. So then it is not new idea to have it also for the GCF. Next, please. And then it was our activities related to GCF. And if we look at the activities of the Indonesian NDA, once they were set up, established in, and then sit in the under the Ministry of Finance, their progress is also actually pretty fast. For example, they have a website in 2 languages. You can also check their websites. So the information is related to the portfolio of projects. Right now we have Indonesia have 5 projects funded by the GCF. There are 3 already accredited entities. Next, please. And there's a lot of publication related to manual, guideline, whatever you want to look. So you can find out the documents that they publish on the website. They also did the annual participatory review. Maybe that's the name of national annual review, by inviting the stakeholders. And they also, the NDA also draft the Indonesian country program by inviting CSO to give comment in the drafting process. Next. Then, based on those 2 activities, our activity on the GCF, the NDA activities to develop their mandate, then right now it's about engagement of our engagement with the Indonesian NDA to GCF. So we conduct meetings with them, whether it is during the GCF board meetings, because previously Indonesia was one of the board directors and advisor of in the board members. And we also visit their office to introduce ourselves when they have a new office and the new setup. But we also provide them with, so we provide the staff of the NDA opportunities to meet the CSO and the local communities and local group to introduce them about what is the expectation actually from the local community to the NDA and GCF. So we invite them also to come into our workshops. Next. And then we were also invited, for example, we attended the consultation on the 3rd draft of the country program documents process, the 4th draft, and also in the participatory annual review forum in Jakarta. Next. The recent one, we were invited to discuss a project proposal tabled for the no objection letter proposed by the Pegasus Capital Advisor. So we discussed the Pegasus, introduced the projects, and all of us, also the CSO, have the opportunity to give our opinions on the project proposals. The next, please. And then one of the activities, as I informed before, we build, we build a stakeholder engagement submission, and we have a dialogue on that with the NDA. Next. And the challenge is we have a good personal relationship, but we want more than that, because it is important that the engagement is not based on the personal individual relationship, but more structural one and institutionalized one. And then the other challenges is how to build capacity to assess proposed projects tabled for getting the no objection letter at the NDA. Right now, NDA listed 36 projects, and also capacity to monitor GCF after the projects approve the GCF. We have right now 5 projects. So that's briefly about our activities, and happy to get further feedback and discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Titi. So as we have heard, Titi, I've seen Titi in a couple of GCF activities for several years already, and the first time she saw the Indonesian NDA, she was running towards the Indonesian NDA, introducing herself that, hey, I am a civil society from Indonesia, and I'll be watching all your actions and will be working with you with regards to anything related to the GCF. So that's one strategy that Aksi and Indonesian groups are doing in their respective countries. And so far, the evolution of their NDA, they have seen the evolution of their NDA, and it's a good thing that in this evolution throughout the process, the CSO is there actively engaging with them. And now they're also very much involved in the providing comments and inputs in funding proposals that will be implemented in Indonesia. So that's a very informative sharing that Titi did, and maybe other regions and other countries can also learn from that experience. So thank you for that, Titi. Because we don't have much time, I will now introduce our last but not the least speaker. We're now shifting to Latin America, and she is the regional node from Latin America of the GCF Watch, Florencia Ortúzar from the Interamerican Association for Environmental Defense, or AIDA. Please go ahead, Florencia, and take us through your experience in the Latin American region.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. Thank you all the people who are here with us. It's been really interesting to be part of this 3-event webinar series. And it's really interesting to hear about what other regional nodes are doing. We can certainly learn from each other. And that's what we're trying to do in the context of the GCF Watch platform. So, well, I'm going to take advantage of the amazing translators we have, and I'm going to do my presentation in Spanish. But I have done the slides in English as well, so you can follow them in English if your language is English. I'll just put a link in the chat where you can access the slides in English. And now I'm going to share my screen. And I suppose you're seeing it now. Okay, so voy a hablar entonces del trabajo que nosotros hacemos como nodo regional en Latinoamérica. Bueno, yo participo de la organización AIDA, que es una organización regional que protege el medio ambiente en toda la región, y en ese sentido estamos en un lugar como privilegiado, se podría decir, para trabajar con Latinoamérica y el Fondo Verde del Clima, porque tenemos como contactos con varios, o intentamos con todos los países de la región. Y en ese sentido es muy interesante. Aquí en Latinoamérica tenemos una gran ventaja con respecto quizás a otras regiones, y es que la gran mayoría de los países hablan el mismo idioma. Entonces tenemos también esa posibilidad de como interactuar más fácilmente. Bueno, voy a partir diciendo lo mismo que dije cuando inauguré esta serie de webinars, que tiene que ver con el problema que estamos tratando de resolver, y es que las instituciones financieras tienen finalidades muy nobles siempre, al menos en lo que declaran, pero muchas veces, incluso así, no logran los beneficios que supuestamente quieren lograr con los fondos que mueven. Entonces, no sé, el Banco Mundial quiere terminar con la pobreza, el BID quiere mejorar la calidad de vida de todos en Latinoamérica, y el Fondo Verde del Clima quiere ayudar a todos los países a enfrentar el cambio climático. Pero el problema es que no es suficiente tener mucho dinero y estar invirtiéndolo en esos muy nobles objetivos, porque muchas veces hay igual problemas. Y este es el problema que nosotros creemos que hay que abordar, y que tiene que ver mucho con la desconexión que muchas veces existe entre los territorios donde están las personas y comunidades que necesitan esos fondos para hacer frente al cambio climático, en el caso del Fondo Verde del Clima, y las personas que están tomando las decisiones por allá en la Junta del Fondo Verde del Clima. Hay una desconexión muy grande. Entonces nosotros hemos como intentado construir un puente entre esos dos extremos, los fondos las decisiones que se toman aquí arriba en la Junta, y los territorios donde está la gente que necesita y que sabe lo que necesita, que conoce sus territorios. Y en ese sentido me gusta mucho decir esto, que es como algo también bastante obvio, pero creo que es importante siempre tenerlo como muy claro, que el involucramiento de la sociedad civil en estos procesos de financiamiento para el cambio climático no es solamente un derecho de esas comunidades que reciben el dinero, es también, y quizás mucho más, un insumo muy valioso que las instituciones financieras tienen que aprovechar, o si no, no se está sacando el mejor provecho de ese dinero que tan urgentemente necesitamos. Y entonces, bueno, lo que nosotros hacemos como nodos regionales del Fondo Verde del Clima es intentar construir ese puente. Y para eso lo que hacemos es que construimos una base de datos de personas de la región que estén disponibles para ayudarnos a construir este puente, que es, en el fondo nosotros apenas sabemos de algún proyecto o programa que el Fondo Verde vaya a financiar, podemos informar a todas estas personas que están en esta base de datos, y esas personas nos ayudan a llegar lo más rápidamente posible a quienes están más cerca de los territorios donde se van a implementar esos proyectos. Así entonces podemos obtener información y podemos cruzarla con la información que está llegando a la Junta, y podemos realmente analizar y ver y saber si es que realmente se está considerando el conocimiento local, la sabiduría local, si realmente el proyecto va en beneficio de las personas que están ahí, si realmente los procesos de participación fueron adecuados, si se consideró el género, si es que los impactos que se están como aceptando, impactos sociales y ambientales, podían evitarse, si se mitigaron correctamente, y etcétera, y todo eso. Entonces ahí lo que hacemos es traspasar esta información hacia los observadores activos que tienen voz de voto ante la Junta Directiva del Fondo Verde del Clima. Ahí entre todos diseñamos las intervenciones, y con eso vamos como entregando estos insumos tan valiosos. Ese es como el gran objetivo. Podemos entregar este punto de vista local a lo que están haciendo los miembros de la Junta por allá arriba, donde están ellos, estos personajes tan importantes, pero a veces están desconectados. Y una cosa que les quería aprovechar de comentar es que nosotros elaboramos una guía para coordinadores del GCF Watch, en alianza con el GCF Watch, y la idea es que esta esté disponible en todos los idiomas de los nodos regionales. Por ahora solamente está en español, pero ya se viene en portugués, en inglés y muy probablemente en francés. Y esta guía entonces es como una especie de kit de ayuda para las personas que está como base de datos, que les llamamos coordinadores del GCF Watch. Es también algo muy parecido a lo que contaba Bertha, que hicieron, lo contaba por el chat, un kit que hicieron ellos en Germanwatch, que también es muy útil para estos efectos. Y porque resulta que, claro, el Fondo Verde del Clima es una máquina muy compleja, pero es posible llegar a entenderla y llegar como a entender cómo es que se forman estas propuestas de financiamiento y cómo puede uno revisarlas de la mejor forma. Entonces, bueno, aquí vamos a poner en el link, en el chat, el link para que ustedes puedan acceder a esta guía, pero esta guía puede descargarse como una sola cosa y también pueden descargarse por capítulos. Entonces tiene, por ejemplo, un capítulo con los aspectos básicos del Fondo Verde del Clima que te ayuda a entender de qué se trata esto y cómo funciona. Luego un capítulo que habla específicamente sobre las propuestas de financiamiento, qué es lo que son, cómo se clasifican, etc. Luego la parte quizás más interesante, creo yo, es una guía para revisar las propuestas de financiamiento. Y aquí te permite como entender cuáles son las partes claves, porque estas propuestas de financiamiento son muchas veces documentos largos y complicados, que pueden ser intimidantes. Pero si tú como que entiendes que están siempre diseñadas de la misma forma, puedes saber dónde mirar y qué preguntas hacerte y qué tipo de comentarios son los que sirven luego para las personas que están haciendo seguimiento al Fondo Verde del Clima allá donde está la Junta. Y de esa manera pueden, la revisión que hacen las personas que están en los territorios, las organizaciones sociales de los territorios, puede ser muy útil para los observadores activos que al final intervienen en las juntas directivas. También hay un capítulo que habla un poco de lo que hemos estado hablando hoy día, de las autoridades nacionales designadas y los puntos focales, dando consejos sobre cómo interactuar con ellos, un poco lo que ya estábamos hablando en este webinar. También se explica sobre el mecanismo de reparación independiente, que es el mecanismo de quejas del Fondo Verde del Clima, que sirve para solicitar remediación cuando se cree o hay daños que tienen que ver con algún proyecto o programa financiado por el Fondo Verde del Clima. Luego hay un capítulo sobre las entidades acreditadas, que también es obviamente información muy importante que saber, que también tiene que ver con el trabajo que hacemos a nivel local, porque tiene que ver con las entidades que al final del día canalizan el dinero que llega desde el Fondo Verde del Clima. Estas entidades, como sabemos, pueden ser entidades internacionales como muy lejanas, pero también pueden ser entidades mucho más locales, de acceso directo, que están más conectadas con los territorios. Y luego finalmente hay un capítulo sobre el GCF Watch, que es esta plataforma donde nos movemos los nodos regionales, que explica cómo mejor usar esa plataforma y cómo también todos podemos aportar a ella. O sea, esa es la gracia, que entre todos le vayamos entregando información y así hacerla lo más útil y completa posible. Y lo último es que también tiene un glosario de términos útiles que resulta bastante útil porque hay una jerga interminable en el GCF Watch de acrónimos. Y bueno, aquí hay una propuesta de cómo traducir los términos y explicar más o menos de qué trata cada uno. Así que bueno, los invito a consultar esa guía que puede resultar muy interesante para interactuar con el Fondo Verde del Clima en todo sentido, digamos. Bueno, y acá es un poco lo que ya había dicho Bertha, de cómo se interactúa con las autoridades nacionales designadas, y un poco, bueno, es interesante en este webinar, hemos visto que las formas son diversas. Al final el Fondo Verde del Clima alienta a los países a que estas autoridades nacionales designadas, que son el vínculo entre el Fondo Verde del Clima y los países, sean muy como cercanas a la sociedad civil, que las involucren. Eso es lo que quiere el Fondo Verde del Clima, al menos en su instrumento de gobernanza, que exista mucha como conexión entre la gente que está ahí, que necesita los fondos, y y los proyectos que se están implementando, y qué mejor manera que tenerlos ahí en la mesa. Pero obviamente esto depende de cada país, y en ese sentido lo que nosotros como sociedad civil hagamos importa, porque uno puede mover a las autoridades nacionales designadas a ser mucho más inclusivas. Obviamente hay países donde esto es mucho más difícil y otros donde se da más, pero ciertamente vale la pena intentarlo. Así que bueno, ya lo decía Bertha, yo creo que es un poco lo mismo, de pedir reuniones, de hacer seguimiento, de invitar a las autoridades nacionales designadas de repente a hablar en talleres, escribirles cartas, preguntarles su postura sobre algunas cosas, averiguar qué están pensando, qué proyectos tienen en carpeta, qué entidades acreditadas están ahí alineándose para postular. Todos esos son temas que tenemos derecho a preguntar y que ellos no están obligados, pero deberían responder y debería interesarles. Una cosa particular que a mí me pareció interesante es revisar el programa país de cada país. Este es un documento que el Fondo Verde del Clima alienta a los países a elaborar, pero no es obligatorio, y se trata básicamente de un documento donde el país expone todo como su política, todo lo que tiene que ver en relación con sus estrategias de cambio climático. Entonces, Chile tiene, por ejemplo, un programa país, y revisarlo es interesante porque te da como los puntos sobre los cuales tú puedes después ir a conversar con la autoridad nacional designada. Por ejemplo, en el de Chile aparecía como un capítulo sobre cómo la autoridad nacional designada estaba intentando como engagement con la sociedad civil, y era realmente bien laxo lo que decía, no era muy impresionante, por decirlo de alguna forma. Entonces ahí a mí eso me da como un piso para yo ir a hablar con ellos y proponerles mejoras. Entonces esa es una idea que también puede ser interesante. Y bueno, siempre también es muy importante que todo lo que se averigüe, lo que se haga, los avances, las experiencias que sirvan, las malas también, porque eso también sirve para aprender, se comparta con la sociedad civil internacional. Alrededor del Fondo Verde del Clima funciona un grupo de sociedad civil de todas partes del mundo que funciona muy bien. Es realmente muy agradable trabajar con este grupo de personas que están alrededor del Fondo Verde del Clima. Entonces es también muy útil que lo que hagamos en nuestros países lo compartamos con ese grupo de personas, porque así vamos entonces construyendo entre todos, mejorando esta plataforma del GCF Watch y ciertamente ayudándonos. Creo que eso también es muy importante tenerlo en cuenta, así que bueno, por eso mismo que instancias como este webinar parecen tan útiles. Bueno, yo les quería contar así como un ejemplo de intento de interacción que hicimos con la autoridad nacional aquí designada en Chile, y este fue una agrupación indígena que me contactó porque querían averiguar sobre el Fondo Verde del Clima como muy en general. Tuvimos una reunión y decidimos que íbamos a pedirle una reunión a la autoridad nacional designada de Chile. Y bueno, lo solicitamos así como por el canal directo que se solicita acá en Chile, y nos dieron una reunión y la tuvimos, y bueno, fue bien interesante porque ellos estaban ahí súper abiertos, muy abiertos a explicarnos todo sobre el Fondo Verde del Clima, cómo funcionaba en Chile, cuáles eran las prioridades del país, qué proyectos estaban en carpeta, cuáles estaban en implementación, y la gente de esta comunidad quería como proponer que ellos estuviesen más involucrados, sobre todo les interesaba un proyecto sobre bosques. Y bueno, las autoridades chilenas como que decían, admitieron que estaban un poquito al debe en cuanto a su interacción con la sociedad civil, pero expresaron que les gustaría tener más recursos y tener como más posibilidades de hacer esa interacción. Ahora, obviamente el que lo digan no quiere decir que lo vayan a cumplir, y esto como que no quiere decir que hayamos ganado ninguna batalla siquiera, pero igual es interesante como uno puede empezar a abrir una institucionalidad que quizás ni existe. Entonces ahí como que yo siento que cimentamos los primeros pasos para lograr esa relación, y claro, si con mucho tiempo y dedicación uno puede como ir avanzando en esa relación e ir construyéndola, es algo que se puede lograr. Las autoridades nacionales designadas, como les contaba y como se ha dicho varias veces en este webinar, tienen ese mandato. Entonces también depende harto de nosotros que lo empujemos. Y bueno, quería terminar mi presentación diciendo que al final se ha avanzado y es interesante todo lo que se ha logrado, pero obviamente también queda mucho por delante. O sea, por ejemplo, personalmente cuando reviso todo esto que hemos logrado, y obviamente con la cantidad de trabajo que uno tiene y de necesidades, es siempre poco los recursos y las capacidades que uno tiene para lograrlo todo, pero a mí, por ejemplo, me gustaría mucho que tuviéramos mayor capacidad para hacer seguimientos a proyectos que ya están en implementación. Sería muy interesante también lograr mucha más interacción con todas las autoridades nacionales designadas de la región, y quizás incluso lograr cierta interconexión entre ellas, para que nos vayamos como nivelando hacia arriba. Las que tienen mejor relación empujen a las que tienen peor relación a hacerlo mejor, porque al final es en el interés de todos, de las autoridades y de las comunidades y del Fondo Verde del Clima y del planeta, que los proyectos y programas sean lo mejor posible. También algo que siempre hemos querido es dejar de ser como arqueros que atajamos malos proyectos, y poder estar involucrados desde antes que los proyectos se diseñen. Eso yo creo que sería como el mejor escenario, o sea que la sociedad, las comunidades de los territorios pudieran como decir, este es el proyecto que necesitamos, y tener mucha más intervención en ese punto, donde aún no se deciden. Luego, por ejemplo, también creo que sería interesante lograr como analizar las capacidades de género que tienen las autoridades nacionales designadas, y de otros temas importantes como, no sé, pueblos indígenas, salvaguardas, hacer como un análisis más acabado de lo que tienen para ofrecer las autoridades nacionales designadas, y así empujar a que mejoren en esos aspectos. Y bueno, y también como último punto, lograr tener entidades acreditadas, que son las que canalizan los fondos, que estén más conectadas a los territorios. Así que eso, bueno, nosotros aquí lo que hacemos es estar siempre haciendo este puente de conexión, informando de los proyectos y programas que se van a presentar para la región lo más rápido posible para poder obtener la mayor cantidad de información que pueda llegar a la Junta y ser útil. Lo mismo con respecto a las entidades acreditadas que buscan acreditación, intentar averiguar cuál es su historia, si es que tienen un buen prontuario, un mal prontuario, todo eso construyendo este puente del que los hablo. Luego también intentamos mantener a la sociedad civil de la región informada sobre lo que pasa, y esto lo hacemos escribiendo resúmenes de todas las reuniones en español una vez que terminan, y con mucho apoyo de la sociedad civil que hace seguimiento al fondo, que entrega estos resúmenes, estos informes en inglés. Ahí nosotros medio que seguimos las reuniones, sacamos insumos de ahí, y logramos compartir información en español fácil de entender para toda la región. Y obviamente, bueno, organizando este tipo de instancias como estos webinars, y estando siempre disponibles a tener reuniones, a ayudar con los contactos con las autoridades nacionales designadas, ayudar si es que alguien necesita usar el mecanismo de reparación independiente, y bueno, y todo lo que pueda ser útil en la construcción de este puente del que les hablo. Así que eso es lo que yo quería compartir, y bueno, les agradezco mucho y muy contenta de estar aquí ya cerrando esta última sesión de nuestro webinar internacional, que espero sea solamente el primero y que vengan muchos más. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Florencia. Love that you shared how the strategy in Latin America is just to first build a database of the CSOs working on the GCF, and have this database of CSOs get their feedback, provide it to the GCF board. Also create this toolkit for coordinators of the GCF Watch, which I think is very useful. We at the Asia region has identified that there's more interest among CSOs in terms of looking at the funding proposals, specific funding proposals in the respective countries, and having a toolkit is very useful for us to examine every funding proposal and really look at the nitty-gritty of these funding proposals and comment on them accordingly. So looking at the time, we are now 4 minutes past the scheduled hour, and we're doing this board meeting style. I will request the indulgence of our participants to extend for a little bit, because we have a few questions from our participants. There are several questions that were raised in the Q&A box, and I think some of them have been answered. There's a question that is addressed to Florencia. Maybe Florencia can answer that in the box. But I have noted 2 questions that anyone from our speakers can answer. So there's a question. First question is about, is there a direct promotion with civil social movements or of civil society, or is it done through state organizations? Sorry, I have to read. So do the funds initiatives have direct promotion with the social movements of civil society, or is it always through state organization? That's one question which anyone from our speakers can answer. And there's another question that I think we can also invite all our speakers to answer. How can we, this is from Pascal of JVE Cameroon. I think this is common also for other CSOs in other countries. How can we truly follow the NDA with their commitments to projects if there are changes in government structure? I think this has been experienced by Indonesia as well, I believe. So maybe Titi can expound on that as well. So I'm inviting our speakers to first answer the question about the promotion of social movements, or is it through state organizations only? And the question on how can we really follow the NDA with their commitments if there's changes in government structure. So go ahead, anyone from our speakers?
So maybe I can answer the second questions. Yeah, Claire?
Yes, go ahead, Titi.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, based off our experience is we need to go after them, you know, because if the government change, they don't give you informations, you know, what they plan, what they will do. Even in our experience, we email the older address, nothing, it's just empty. So then we got the information through the GCF that the new NDA was already announced. But the question is also how to approach them, because Ministry of Finance is not used to be connected or advocated by the NGO. Usually the NGO go to the Ministry of Environment, Forestry, National Planning, but not Finance. So I think the opportunity was the Asia Regional Dialogue hosted by the GCF, where all the NDA and CSO were invited. So that's venue brought the opportunity to directly approach them. So I don't know, because from other country to the other country is different, whether it is you can just go to the ministry that you know is actually the NDA office, because the GCF give the list of the NDA. Where are they? Whether it is Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Environment. So you just go there, introduce yourself. It must be, we need to be persistent, you know. Otherwise they just say, oh, we don't know. But persistent is important, because we know why we are there. We need to really saying them that, you know, we are the one that monitor the GCF. It means we also monitor you at home. So it's something like that, you know. I think the persistence is key issue, how to approach them. And once they have the website, and then ask them to do website, to do this, and to do that. A lot of requests, you know, things like that. That's what I can answer, Claire.
Okay, thank you, Titi. So yes, that's coming from the experience of Titi. She really approached the NDA of Indonesia, and since then, the NDA of Indonesia knows Titi, and that every move that they will do is monitored by Titi. They know that.
So Claire was my witness, yeah, when I approached them in Danang.
And I think that's a good thing, because the NDA at the back of their heads, they know that they have to really consider the inputs and the valuable inputs of civil society in their respective countries. So, and I think other countries in other regions can also learn from that as well. Okay, so there's another question about this is, and anyone, I invite all our speakers to please answer the question if possible. Do the funds initiatives have direct promotion with social movements of civil society, or is it always through state organizations?
I can give a quick answer, and then maybe someone will like, if I understand correctly, I mean, technically, yes, because everything that goes to the GCF has to be approved by the NDA. If you remember a bit in my presentation when I mentioned about the no objection letters, and you know also the nomination for direct access entities, all of that has to be done through government. However, that I think also I mentioned in the presentation, it doesn't mean that all the projects necessarily have to come from the government. CSOs can present projects, especially the very few who are accredited to manage GCF funding, but also the other ones, they can join forces with accredited entities in theory and present projects. The problem is you will still always need to have the no objection letter from the government. So even if it's a project or a program or an intervention that comes from the civil society organizations, you would still need to go to your NDA and ask for this no objection letter. So yeah, unfortunately, most of the processes that come from the UNFCCC, the convention, and the GCF being the part of the financial mechanism of this convention, all of it goes through like the sovereign official government processes. So yeah, that's why the point was how important these nationally designated authorities are, because you need them for basically everything you want to do with the GCF.
Yep. Yes, I agree with Bertha. I think we have stressed enough how important engaging with the NDA is, because they play a crucial role in implementing the projects in our respective countries, as well as whatever that we submit to the GCF for approval or to the GCF board for approval has to go through the NDA. So it's really crucial to establish that connection with them. Okay, so anyone else from our speakers? If none, I think Florencia will answer the question addressed to her live. Is that correct?
Thank you, Claire. Yes, well, I had written in the chat, but basically the question was, what have we achieved by building this bridge? And I guess we have achieved like a much efficient connection between what the communities need and think about the projects and programs and the decisions that decision makers are taking there on the board. So this is like, we are building like a sort of narrative, because while we get better information from the territories, we are also passing that information to the board, and we're sort of building what we really want. And this in the end permeates to the board members for all projects, because in the end, civil society more or less has like a common narrative of what people need in the territories. So we're more efficient, and we are building this better narrative with the board members, sort of capacitating them into understanding what is really needed and the importance of taking into account this local knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that. And we have to remember that half of our board members live in the global north. So maybe they're not that familiar with the realities of the people and local communities in the global south. So it is important for us to really reiterate and repeat, even if we sound like a broken disc, to our board members. These are the perspectives and the insights of the people from the ground, the people from the grassroots, and they are the most vulnerable to the climate crisis. So that's important, and that also concludes how important the role of civil society is in all the GCF processes, in all of the GCF programs and its operations. And with that, I think we can end our session 3 with a very positive note from all our speakers. Thank you to all our participants who stayed until the end, and thank you for also asking questions and participating throughout our webinar session. I will give the floor to Florencia for some final remarks as we conclude our GCF Watch International Webinar Series.
Okay, just wanted to thank all of the organizers and the participants. Thanks especially to Bertha, who was there all the time, helping me organize this. But to all of you, it's been amazing, and I hope we can do this soon again, because there's so much interest in this, and it's clear that we learn a lot from each other. So this is very, very positive for all of us, and it's amazing to see how we can help each other from all over the globe. So good night, good day, because we're all over the place in this webinar, and thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.